If Oscar Piastri's victory at the Hungarian Grand Prix tells us anything, it's that regarding McLaren and their driver lineup, we are now at the end of the beginning of the Oscar Piastri-Lando Norris dynamic. With a car that could be argued to be the best on the grid right now, we have seen the relationship between Norris and Piastri take a slightly different turn this season, and Oscar's win has just leveled up everything. McLaren are now able to boast two race-winning drivers in their lineup, as well as a car that's probably giving Red Bull nightmares. And with that, Oscar and Lando have entered a whole new league in their F1 careers. Gone are the days of doing each other favours to pick up a small amount of points and perhaps a podium, and we are now firmly in the jungle of battling for race wins. And I sense that unfortunately for Lando, he hasn't quite got that number 2 driver that he originally envisioned in Oscar Piastri that would be helping him on his quest for race wins and championships. Instead, he's got a driver next to him in Piastri that's got his head screwed on, that won't be walked over, and has his own aspirations for F1 greatness. Piastri's win, followed by Norris's somewhat interesting response after the race and also venting his frustrations during the race, I think has shown us that we have just finished a previous era at McLaren and we are about to enter a whole new one. And a big question is, what is this going to deliver for the rest of the season and also next season? Wins, championships, or maybe even just headaches and frustration? Only time will tell. But let's focus on the right now and jump straight in and look at why this is the end of the beginning for the Norris and Piastri dynamic. But before we do, why not click that little subscribe button below? It's fantastic when you do, and I really appreciate the support. Can I just say straight away though, that cocking up a 1-2 finish and having it in such fashion that they did is something that only McLaren could probably do right now. The way they did it and all the drama and politics behind it is kind of like having your cake and nobody eating it. Because of McLaren's indecisiveness and poor strategy that we have seen time and time again, not only did they fail to close the gap to Max Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship, they also allowed Piastri to win in circumstances that he probably would have preferred not to. But at the end of the day, a win is a win, and the records are going to show Oscar Piastri first placed Hungary Grand Prix 2024. And as time goes on, all of this stuff that went on is going to be forgotten. But to some people, most importantly Lando Norris and some of his biggest fans, they are going to say that the only reason Piastri won this Grand Prix and got into a position to do so was that Norris let him pass. Norris effectively let him win the race. So whilst Lando was visibly upset and annoyed by this and also showed his frustration during the race, I think he will take some sort of comfort knowing that Piastri won in the circumstances that he did. I'm sure once he talks to his people, he'll adopt this mentality of that Piastri only won the race because I allowed him to do so. He won because I decided to follow the rules this one last time. And funnily enough, I think in his mind, I think Lando is going to make the decision never to do this sort of thing ever again. And my heart does go out to Piastri because this was a race that he absolutely deserved to win, and it's fantastic that he scored his first win in only his second season. It just seems spoiled somewhat by the general drama and unprofessionalism that we saw throughout the whole of the Hungarian Grand Prix. With McLaren cocking up pit stops, and then there's undercuts, and then trying to correct the situation rather than letting it play out organically. But with Piastri being the guy who he is, and in my opinion the more mature driver over Lando Norris, I think he's going to rise above all of this, and he's going to have his sights firmly set on a legitimate victory at the Belgian Grand Prix. So whilst Lando's people have probably spoken to him and rationalised all of this in his favour, Piastri's people would have done exactly the same too. Most notably Mark Webber, who is Piastri's manager, was one of the most down-to-earth and say-it-how-it-is people in Formula 1. He probably couldn't have a better person in his corner right now just to spell it all out, rationalise it all, and say this is how we're going to deal with this moving forward. Because of all the drama that we saw between Lando Norris and McLaren going on throughout the race and afterwards, it appears that Oscar Piastri has come out of this whole thing unscathed. So perhaps the best thing for Piastri to do now is just to keep his head down, let the people talk, let the bickering happen, and just do your talking on the track. Be the bigger man and just let all this sort of stuff happen. So as I mentioned earlier, the reason I think we're now at a new stage of the Oscar Piastri-Lando Norris dynamic is because Lando now realises that he is not going to have this obedient number 2 driver that he originally envisioned. He won't have this guy underneath him to do favours and have team orders subjected to him whenever Lando Norris is in a bit of trouble. And understandably, Norris is upset that McLaren didn't prefer to give him the win and close the gap to Max in the Drivers' Championship, especially when Max himself has had such an absolute shambles of a race. A situation where there was so much to gain, but McLaren decided not to. They decided against prioritising Lando Norris, who was second in the Drivers' Championship. So Lando must be asking himself a few questions right now, such as, does this team really have the World Championship as a realistic objective? Or he might even be asking, am I the priority, or am I the spearhead for McLaren, or are they kind of returning to an equal footing between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri? So whilst it really is great to see Oscar Piastri get the win, and he thoroughly deserved it by this stage, I do still find it odd that they chose against prioritising Lando Norris and his fight in the Drivers' Championship. In fact, that's probably the answer. McLaren's objective here must be solely the Constructors' Championship. Maybe they haven't really copped on that they are potentially within a shout of the Drivers' Championship as well. And maybe Norris is even wondering this as well. Is the team even really serious about a shot at the Drivers' Championship? Because even whilst he is second in the driver standings, Norris isn't getting prioritised at the moment. And even watching the final stages of the race, where Lando's engineers were pleading to him, trying every trick in the book to bring him on side, I was wondering, what would some of the F1 greats have done in this situation? In exactly the same situation, in a championship battle, would a Schumacher have let his teammate pass? Or a Vettel, or a Senna, a Hamilton, or even a Verstappen? And I severely doubt it, and I suspect all of them would have just cruised to first place and dealt with all the tellings off and media fallout afterwards. Success for these guys is absolutely number one, and the media public perception doesn't come close. So maybe long-term Norris has to adopt a slightly different approach, maybe something similar to some of those guys. Because something I've noticed, and it's especially apparent this season, I think, is that Lando Norris is a very emotional driver, certainly far more so than Oscar Piastri. And when you listen to some of the team radio from that race, McLaren were really trying to appeal to his emotional side.
And there are 5 laps to go. The way to win a championship is not by yourself, it's with the team. You're going to need Oscar and you're going to need the team.
So moving forward, if Norris is not going to allow something like this to happen again, is he going to have to adopt a more sort of logical, robotic approach? I mean, right now, Oscar Piastri certainly has a less emotional and much more logical response, and this has now actually served him very well. We don't really see Piastri blow up in the same way that Norris does, not in front of camera anyway, and so far this has actually brought him up to a level where he is now actually threatening the position of Norris at McLaren. So if Lando is to kind of maintain an upper hand, he might have to start keeping a lid on things. And for us fans anyway, this whole thing could not have come at a better time. We have Spa up next, and if McLaren's rate of improvement continues, both Lando and Oscar will be favourites to win this race. Although both drivers are now at 1-1 in terms of race wins, I'm sure that this bothers Norris more than it does Piastri, and with that, Lando is absolutely going to be wanting to get the upper hand before the summer break. Because from the outside anyway, it appears now that Norris seems to be more preoccupied about Piastri than the other way around. If Norris wins or does well, Piastri seems just happy to be there and happy for the team. But however, if it's the other way around and Piastri wins or does well, the whole bottom of Norris's world just seems to fall out. Even the rate of development that we've seen with Oscar has been nothing short of impressive, and if this continues at its current trajectory, Lando could find life to be very difficult after the summer break. I think if he's to have a real shot at the Drivers' Championship this season, and even the chances of that are slim, McLaren are going to have to adopt a whole different strategy, have a priority driver and a follow-up one, so that they're not taking points off each other. But a driver like Piastri is not one that you want to tether down and put on a leash. Because from what we've seen so far, his developmental ceiling is just so high, who knows where he can go. And that's what's so fascinating about Piastri, because he appears to be this team player, he doesn't appear to be selfish, and these aren't the sort of things that you associate with race winners, but he still is, and he does look like the real deal. In fact, for the sake of a championship push, from Lando Norris's perspective, having someone like Daniel Ricciardo in the car next to him might not have been such a bad thing after all. So I'm sensing right now that McLaren are finding themselves in a very difficult situation, because they've set the car up and they've developed it in such a way that they're finding themselves now to be race winners and championship contenders a lot earlier than they probably expected to. The way they've built their driver lineup and the dynamic behind it with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, this seems more like it's set up for that of a midfield or upper front end team rather than a championship contender. Generally, the thinking behind it is that of a midfield team. You get the best drivers that you possibly can, so you can snatch points or maybe even a podium here or there, and we won't have to worry about team orders because neither driver are realistically going to be in a race winning position, so Personality-wise, there isn't going to be a clash, or we hope not anyway. Although right now they find themselves arguably with the best car on the grid, and Lando Norris is achieving what the team want him to. However, what they didn't expect is that the driver which they snatched off Alpine is overachieving and developing at a much higher rate than expected. So I sense McLaren must ask themselves, do they ride this rate of development that they're seeing from Piastri, or do they tether him and tie him down a bit this season so that they can maximise Lando Norris's potential Drivers' World Championship chances? And if they did that, then sure, it could land the Constructors and Drivers' Championships, and that would be great for Lando Norris, but that could potentially also lead to Mark Webber having some interesting conversations with other teams. And if McLaren think this is a problem now, this could turn into a monumental one in 2025, especially if they have that proper race-winning car. So whatever McLaren come up with for 2024, it probably won't keep everybody happy, but it's probably just going to be to get them over the line, get 2024 finished, and focus on 2025 when we come to it. And come next season, if the car is fast enough, if the team can accommodate it, let both of them race. We may even find ourselves with a championship battle with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri next season. And something that's equally tricky for McLaren right now is that both of them are on long-term contracts, with Norris expiring in 2027 and Piastri in 2026. Now, I'm not saying either of them will be eyeing up a driver move in the coming years, but both of them will want to establish themselves as the dominant figure at McLaren in their own way in which they choose to do so. But worryingly, and I have a feeling of this, come 2025, I don't think McLaren is going to be big enough for the both of them. So if the car is a race winner and both drivers are up for the championship, then they could have a massive falling out. And the question is, are McLaren now a team that's mature enough and experienced enough to deal with this? And yes, I know McLaren have been around for years, but what I'm talking about is this new era that we've had since Zak Brown came in. So from Spa through the summer break until the rest of the season, get the popcorn out, pour yourself a drink and enjoy. Because I have a strong feeling that the Norris and Piastri dynamic at McLaren is going to be the highlights of the rest of the season. And following on from the Hungarian Grand Prix, neither driver is going to want to give each other an inch. They're going to want to absolutely maximise their chances, and this could very well land them the Constructors' Championship, but at the same time, it might also cost them the Drivers' Championship, which Lando Norris is perhaps maybe within a shout, but is going to have Oscar Piastri complying and supporting him all the way. And the question is he going to really want to do that? Either way, I cannot wait to see how this develops. And so with that, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are you supporting Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri? Who was right, who was wrong in the race? And come 2025, even I know it's a long way away, who is going to come out on top? Let me know below. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like, share and subscribe. And as always, I'm Paul, and I'll see you later. Cheers.